I am in just outside of Baltimore in Glen Burnie. Yeah, yeah. I watched in prep for this. I watched one of your interviews. I can't remember the lady's name who you were with. All right. Oh, nice. When's the last time you were back here? Oh, good, good.
A year and a half, probably. Probably the
Jesus.
longest I've ever been away, actually. A year and a half, probably.
You
Probably the
know,
longest I've ever been away, actually.
my family's in Ohio,
Oh,
and
okay.
I actually haven't gone back either. It's just it hasn't been worth the risk. Um,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, especially since like the big people I really want to see were my last two grandparents, and
Right.
I mean I'd be devastated if I gave them something.
Yeah, yeah, I know, definitely. You got to think about that kind of thing. And that's why, that's one of the big reasons I didn't go back. Hiroko and I made it out last year, just before everything locked down. We were in the States for a ton.
Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Gentlemen, welcome. My name is Lycan, and we are back after a long hiatus for another episode of the Pod Thickens. And with me tonight is none other than Matt Alt. Matt, you are, to my understanding, a translator and Japanese cultural expert. Would that be the correct way to describe your profession?
Translator. I don't know about an expert, but I do my best. Yeah, writer, all sorts of stuff out here. We run a localization company. My wife and I founded about 20 years back, and we've been living in Tokyo. And we help Japanese companies produce the English and sometimes the European versions of all sorts of products, mainly video games. Traditionally, that's what we've mainly done, but also books. We work a lot with toy companies, manga companies. We've translated a lot of manga, many, many pages. So all sorts of stuff that we interface between Japan and the West in a kind of entertainment context. And then most recently, I've gotten into writing. I wrote my first solo debut. It's called Pure Invention: How Japan's Pop Culture Conquers the World.
That is awesome. So the first thing I want to ask, this is actually deviating completely from the questions I've written. I is it almost entirely Japanese to Western, or do you sometimes do Western to Japanese?
We definitely do Western to Japanese. Most famously, a couple of years back, we were working on with several other people the subtitles to the Steven Soderbergh film Magic Mike,
Really?
going from English to Japanese, and that was I mean, Soderbergh films are crazy anyway because they have so much overlapping dialogue, but that one is like it was particularly profane, and there's not a lot of analogs for English swear words in Japanese because Japanese just doesn't work that way. There aren't really any bad words like we have in English. It's more like, to insult somebody, you use variations on like forms of address and
Mm-hmm.
politeness levels that we just don't have in English. So it was really interesting, working with the other, team members on that. But yeah, we definitely do go into Japanese as well. So, and as a matter of fact, like recently, it's been interesting more that way than the other way, to be honest. So it's funny how things, there's cycles to things.
When you run into that situation where um, you're translating something that the connotation or the use just doesn't really exist from the Western world to Japanese, do you like workshop it after you've translated it to kind of see if it's hitting the way it should?
Yeah, it's there's no, I don't believe there's any such thing as a con like a concept that can't be translated. Like, and I always use this as a perfect example. Like, it's the concept of time flies when you're having fun, right?
Mm.
That's a Western idiom. And if you explain that to a Japanese person, of course they get it. When
Mm-hmm.
you're having a good time, the time seems to flow faster, but it's not an idiom over there. So it's very difficult. Like if some scene hinges on that being an idiom, or even more dangerously, like for instance, maybe in a kid's cartoon or a comic book, like if a clock suddenly starts flying, then it sprouts wings and starts flying when somebody says that, that context is going to be totally gone. Like it's just
Right.
not going to be understood. So you have to figure out, are you going to explain, well, this is an idiom in English, or are you going to come up with another joke that has nothing to do with that? And it just depends on all sorts of things. Who's the target audience? What does the creator of the content want?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, there's no like, this is called localization. And it's basically how you massage the content kind of to work best in the target language and the target audience. And that's a big discussion with like everybody involved. It's not just like the translator will never just be like, I'm going to unilaterally decide to make a completely different joke here. It's always done as part of a team.
So something I've seen over the years, an example I could think of is the word Schadenfreude from
Oh,
German, which is
sure.
like taking pleasure in someone else's pain, right? Or
Yeah.
misfortune. And that's a word that I don't think I really heard until like Reddit around 2012, 2013, right? And if I'm accurate in that, I would say that's a word that I could say within the last decade has come into the lexicon of Americans, or
Yeah.
at least the Western world. Can you think of something that in the time that you've been doing this work was not part of an idiom or something generally understood in Japanese culture that Westerners kind of
Sure.
imparted onto them?
Oh man, so many things. I mean, those are called loanwords, right? And Japanese is full of them, and so is English, as a matter of fact. English is like a synthesis of a bunch of kind of European, Romance and Germanic languages. And most famously, I mean, there's all sorts of Japanese words like sushi and karaoke that we've been using for years.
Mm-hmm.
But most recently, like things like senpai, like notice me senpai, nobody would have understood that even 5 years ago. I don't think.
No,
And
yep.
it's interesting to me because the best loan words, so to speak, are the ones that fit some kind of need that or express some kind of concept that doesn't exist in the target language. And actually, as a localizer, as a translator, one of the kind of advanced tricks is knowing when not to translate a word, when you should just leave the Japanese, or I'm sure this is true for European languages, whatever, you should leave it as is. And a great case in point for that is yokai, the word for Japanese monsters from folklore and stuff like that. And that concept has really taken off over the last 10 years or so. There's all sorts of anime and manga featuring them. And they've been kind of a feature of Japanese folklore for like thousands of years, literally. And even if you're not familiar with the word, you probably know some of them, like kappamaki sushi. It's named after the kappa, which is this yokai that eats cucumbers. That's why they call cucumber rolls kappamaki. But when you're translating that, like if you call them monsters, like kind of freights them with this, it has baggage, you know what I mean? They're not demons,
Mm-hmm.
so yokai are yokai, and
I
some are cats too, by the way. So maybe that was excellent timing there.
He has incredible timing with jumping up on me during the middle of anything important that I'm doing. And he is an aggressively affectionate cat.
I know the feeling. Look at
Uh,
that tail.
yes, and I mean, like he'll end up on my shoulder in minutes, and then get tangled in this, and then fall off, and then get snared, and then get really mad at me. It's a cycle. Speaking of cats, thank you, Taco. What is the significance of cats in Japanese culture?
The significance of cats. Japanese people, I mean, they're popular pets here.
They seem to be. I mean, so this is from dumb American. I'm going to impart on you all my stupid. What about this in Japanese world? Like questions.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know that, this isn't like the ancient Egyptians worshiping cats or something like that. Japanese love cats. I mean, it's funny. Some of the first pop culture to filter into the West after the opening of the ports in Japan in the 1850s, woodblock prints, they're called ukiyo-e, like, Hokusai and people like that.
Mm-hmm.
You might have heard these names, these greats of Japanese art. A lot of that was cat-related art, kind of the first memes almost, if you want to think of it that way. So cats have always been a kind of beloved presence here. We were talking about yokai before. There's actually yokai cats. It's believed that once cats reach a certain advanced age, their tails will split in two. And they kind of attain powers, the ability to walk on their hind legs and speak and dance and things like that and trick humans. But they, in my opinion anyway, they're pretty good at tricking humans even when they're on four legs and not particularly old. So
Yeah.
I mean, cats are a big presence in Japanese culture and pop culture and stuff.
I think it's, and maybe this is just because it's a common pet, or I think of all the anime that I've seen, there always seems to be like some sort of cat familiar or cat
Sure.
presence, or like the cat girls, cat boys, like that
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
thing.
The
So I
cat
just,
ears, yes. They're like
yeah,
proto furries.
yeah. So it's like I see that, and it's like, okay, is there something with cats? Like, is there
Well,
some,
cats, it's just like the West, right? Cats are a kind of mercurial, like everybody loves dogs too. I love dogs. I'm actually a cat person, but I love dogs too. But dogs are very, I mean, they're so loyal and predictable and they're great. I love dogs, but cats are completely, off in their own world. And I think that's kind of what the appeal is. Like who's owning whom kind of thing.
This is the only cat I've ever experienced that lets any human being do this. And he will sit here for an hour if I let him.
Oh man.
He is
He
that
just
kind of,
he just wants to be loved.
he really does. It's
Yes.
kind of disgusting. So speaking of furry things, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about are mascots. And
Sure.
this mascot culture, like my first experience or exposure to it was, you ever watch a show called Last Week Tonight?
Yes, yes.
Did you ever see his mascot episode?
Yeah, I know I did like years ago. Yes, I know he went. I know he went kind of hunting for them, and it's a big thing here in Japan. That's for sure.
Yeah, so I guess like there are mascots for cities, there are mascots for companies,
Everything.
and not just Pokemon. Like, yeah. So can you?
Oh yeah, no, like yeah. In the West, like mascots tend to be kind of like ferocious animals. Like you're a sports team, and like we're the
Mhm.
Eagles, or like the Ravens, or like they're not really ferocious, but you know what I mean, like the
Yep.
Lions, the Tigers. Or they tend to be kind of anthropomorphic animals, and that I think comes out of our cartoon culture in the West, like Disney and stuff like that, and Warner Brothers is full of anthropomorphic animals, and
Mhm.
so there's a kind of long history of that. But in Japan, there is this. Japan has like it's not a Judeo-Christian society. It has this more the roots of Japanese spirituality and religion are kind of animistic and polytheistic, many gods. In fact, Shinto is said to be a pantheon of 8 million gods. And those gods range from all the way like on high, like world creators, all the way down to kind of spooks who kind of lurk in the shadows. There's this whole range of them. But the fundamental idea is that anything can possess a spirit. Shinto is a very nature forward, nature worshiping kind of religion. And there's a lot of kind of holy terrain, like even words are believed to have can have spirits in them here. And I'm not saying that average Japanese people walk down the street thinking that this chair sitting on the street has a spirit in it. I'm just
Right.
talking about
Mhm.
the very traditional underpinnings of this. And I think that kind of when you can imagine that there are spirits dwelling in the world around you, I think that goes a long way towards coming up with the idea that these could be characters. And I think this is kind of one of the fuels, one of the kind of furnaces for creating character culture in Japan, and why Japan has so many popular characters and mascots, many of which are anthropomorphic things that we wouldn't necessarily associate with being personified in the West, like anthropomorphic foods. Like if you go out to some countryside, village or something like that, they might have some kind of special dish that they're known, or some kind of crop that they're known for growing, and like all of a sudden Mr. Ricefield will come walking out, you know what I mean, or Mr. Stew, you know what I mean, like whatever their local delicacy is. And that's just like now it's like it's basically de rigueur. Like if you're doing some kind of outreach, you have to have a mascot. Like whether you're whether you're some kind of kids museum, or whether you're like the national tax authority, like the Japanese equivalent of the IRS, they have mascots too. Everybody has mascots. So it's like there's probably like more mascots than actual human beings here sometimes, but I like to think. But it's kind of that's just another expression of Japan's character culture, and why I think one of the reasons why Japanese pop culture is so dynamic.
Mhm.
Why, and that's linked to the yokai that we were talking about before, those monsters from folklore. That has a huge tradition here, and a lot of the yokai are personified things or anthropomorphic things, and they look a lot like mascots as we think of them. So there's a huge tradition of that here. It's not just like somebody thought it up recently.
Mhm. So talking about like that culture and like the bleeding out into the West, one thing that we have here are weebs, and like that's obviously a very often derogatory term, but then it's kind of been reclaimed by the huge anime fan community. But like
Sure.
overall, there is the idea of the huge anime fan, and then the cliche of the weeb, which is the super obsessed with in my very cynical view, is a surface level understanding of Japanese culture
Sure, sure.
through the overconsumption. But I'm curious. So, like, let's say from the derogatory, pejorative term, do the Japanese people have a view of that type of Westerner? Like,
Well,
is that
I don't think they know. I don't think the concept of weebs or weeaboos is really well known here. What they
okay?
have in Japan is a word called otaku,
Mm,
and otaku was a very derogatory term when it first emerged. It's a polite way of saying you. We were talking about those politeness levels. It's a super
yeah.
polite way of saying you, like almost like thou, like thee and thou, kind of like that
Mm,
level. We don't really have politeness levels like that in English, so it's tough to convey. But in the early 80s, a subcultural writer noticed that like diehard anime fans were calling each other that instead of the standard you, as a kind of like distancing measure, because they were in their own little social bubbles. They don't actually want to kind of, make
in
contact
Japan.
in Japan. Yeah. And
Okay.
so he wrote this column. He's like, I'm going to just call like obsessive fans of anime otaku. I'm just going to call them that. And it took off, and everybody started calling these like nerds otaku. And at first, it was kind of seen as a term of endearment, and then it rapidly kind of turned into this derogatory term. And by the late 80s, early 90s, it was like literally akin to calling somebody a child molester. Like it was that bad. And it was banned. You couldn't say it on air in the Japanese media for a long time, in the mainstream media. And then, like, they rehabilitated themselves, or I should say, like, society turned more like them. Like all sorts of otaku content started hitting big, like Evangelion, you might have heard of, a
Mm,
big anime. There was a show called Train Man that came out at the turn of the millennium that was about a nerd who found a girlfriend, like even though he was like a super anime nerd. And basically our tastes, as our adult tastes, have really otaku-atized over the decades anyway. So now we're like, it's normal for grown-ups to go see superhero movies and stuff like that. It's normal for grown men and women to like get enthusiastic about Harry Potter, which is
mm-hmm.
basically read for kids, right? When I was a kid, when I was going to high school in the 80s, you had to hide the fact you were still reading comic books. Like that was not cool. Like you would get like dragged out behind the bleachers and to getting the shit kicked out of you. You know what I mean? It was not a cool thing. Now it is. Now it's like you can be a 30-year-old dude with like a Bulbasaur on your shelf, like
Definitely.
you. No, but it's seriously, it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, it's totally fine, and like that's not going to, like, if somebody you're dating or something finds out about that, she's probably not going to be like, ew, she's gonna be like, I have a Bulbasaur too, because we've all turned into nerds, and so it's weebs, to get back to your original question, are just a kind of like, they're a little bit more extreme on the spectrum, I guess. That's a kind of idolization. That's a kind of idolization of Japan.
Mm,
That's idolization of Japan, and kind of almost a reverence. It's better than what like 19 and 20-year-olds were doing to Japan in 1944, which is dropping
true.
bombs on it from B-29. So it's like, that was how we interacted with Japan back then. So it's like, I think most Japanese people would think it was cute. Oh, this person's so in love with Japan.
So that's curious to me that like it was within Japan that kind of derogatory connotation for a heavy anime watcher. It's interesting to me because I've always thought that anime was just the style. The way I watched Dexter's Laboratory, all the other Cartoon Network shows, the Nickelodeon shows, Angry Beavers, Doug. I just assumed that anime is what kids watched over there. Is that not the case?
Well, anime is the Japanese word for animation produced in Japan. The term was coined way back in 1963 by a guy named Osamu Tezuka to
Okay.
describe his show. He created the show called Astro Boy,
Oh yeah.
which is,
Yep.
it's well known, and it was a huge hit in Japan and a pretty big hit abroad too. But he's like, this is not animation, because Japanese would say animation. He's like, this is anime, like it's made in Japan. It's our thing, and it was the first domestically produced cartoon, to like full length, like half-hour long Japanese cartoon series,
Okay.
and it sparked a whole boom for series. But anime was like kids stuff for probably the first 10 to 15 years of its existence. It wasn't until like the first generation of kids who had been raised on that and grew up into teenagers and young adults who still liked it, that this idea of, well, wait a second, anime isn't necessarily just kid stuff, started to come out. And it was around the mid to late 70s when a series of anime shows that were deliberately aimed at a kind of tween and an older audience started to hit one after the other. One of them is called Yamato. It's about this giant space battleship. And another one is called Gundam, Mobile Suit Gundam.
Yes.
Which is about giant robots fighting in this kind of space opera, Sturm und Drang between Earth and the space colonies. But that show, the reason it took off is because it starred a bunch of teenage kids who were just getting completely pushed around and tormented by the adults in their lives. And that really resonated with young Japanese who were feeling pushed around by all the teachers and authority figures in their lives. It actually kind of sparked this revolution in animated entertainment. So anime is a style, but it's a medium is really what it is. It's not a genre, it's a medium. And like, you can tell any story in anime. You can tell like a story to toddlers, or you can tell like even gross pornographic stuff and everything in between. There's educational anime, that's shown in schools. There's anime that appeals to like middle-aged and late middle-aged people. There's anime that appeals to teens and kids. So it's animation made in Japan. That's all it is, and you can tell any story you want with that.
Yeah, I think it was just from my perspective is I thought that's how I viewed it. But the idea, like, to look at, like, I can't. There's nothing that I can think of in American culture. Like, maybe like when the Pokemon craze is out, you're like, okay, this person's like 50 that's focusing on Pokemon. Like, you might have been like a little, what's up there? But otherwise, like, just there's no real person of a younger age that we've ever, like, I can't think of an equivalent kind of thing.
Well, I don't think it's any coincidence that like these hyper consumers of pop culture kind of emerged in Japan first. Japan got to like our modern times ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. I mean, you had huge numbers of people packed into these really modern cities. Japanese cities had to get totally rebuilt after World War II. Like, we bombed them literally to the ground. So you had these modernized cities with huge chunks of the population in there. They have great infrastructure. So there's a lot of like, people are using trains to commute. There's a lot of downtime in between your jobs. There's a lot of like demand for leisure time. Like they reach kind of the middle class first. They reach like kind of the urbanized, like this kind of tipping point of urbanized culture first. And so that's why Japan starts creating all of these wild devices like the karaoke machine or like the Walkman, or like cartoons for adults that start emerging there to serve this like kind of demand for this hunger for escape that we hadn't really developed in the States yet. At the turn of like, if you're talking like the 70s and 80s, like video games were basically like things you played in a bar in between like ordering beers, like Pong or like Breakout or something. It was Japan that turned those into kind of more cinematic experiences, like Space Invaders or like Pac-Man or like Donkey Kong, which is literally like playing a cartoon. So it's like, that I don't think it's any coincidence that like otaku emerged there, that adults like openly loving kids culture emerged there, that like all of these weird gadgets that we love emerged there. It's because Japan really did get to the future a little ahead of the rest of us.
Yeah, no, that actually makes perfect sense. You mentioned something, I don't remember what triggered it, but I want to take it down a little darker path. When it comes to like the views of Japanese culture, like, so here I'm going to give you the ignorant American assumptions based on what little I know, and is that Japanese culture, you have the salarymen work very, very hard. It's a very stressful existence, and you have very high suicide rates in Japan.
You used to have the salarymen. Now, like, that all fell apart in the 90s. Like Japan.
Okay.
Yeah. So like, Japan like discovered quote unquote the gig economy, and like, kids just kind of like, they weren't really saddled with debt, but they couldn't afford to leave their parents' houses. Like all of these trends that we see happening in the West now after the Great Recession of 2008, like Japan started experiencing those in 1990 when its economy crashed. And so you had this huge like crumbling of like the safety nets. Like in the 60s and 70s and 80s, like if you got a job as a salaryman, you're just guaranteed like a job and a pension. You know what I mean? You're guaranteed to be able to get like a good mortgage, like all of this stuff. That all fell apart in the 90s. And so that like all sorts of like youth social problems started to manifest there, that at the time people were like, wow, Japan is so weird. They have these like hikikomori, And like now we use that word. It's like for people who shut into their house and don't come out, or like the idea, there's another word, parasite singles, which are like young people who just continue living with their parents, like even though they're like 25, 35 years old. And it's because you can't leave. Like if you don't have enough money to leave, like I don't think everybody wants to live with their parents and not get married when they're 30 or 35 years old. I think it sucks for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And for those who doesn't suck for, that's great too. But it's, we're talking about broad societal trends. So yeah, I mean, Japan got to the future in good ways and it got to the future in bad ways. And that's actually kind of the entire topic of the book that I wrote, Pure Invention, how these inventions of like all of these fantasy delivery devices like anime and video games and like Tamagotchis and Pokemon and anonymous bulletin board systems that cause all sorts of political problems. They manifested in Japan first and then spread to the rest of the world because they suited our needs that we didn't know that we had yet.
Yeah. So, okay. I mean, that's good to hear then, because my follow-up was going to ask if Japan has like kind of changed their views on like the work-life balance from the stereotype, I guess, that we understand over here.
Young people have, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Young people for sure. Yeah. I mean, look at this. Like, we are turning to Japan for help on that front now. Like we turn to like Marie Kondo when we want to kind of simplify our lives,
Does it spark joy?
Exactly. Like it's, you have too much stuff you probably bought from Japan. So now buy this book from Japan to tell you how to get rid of the stuff that you bought from Japan. That's a cynical way of looking at it. But actually Japan, like the Japanese authority figures are kind of trying to reposition the country, not as, because they're no longer like a manufacturing powerhouse like they used to be. That's China, that's Korea. Mm-hmm. But Japan is kind of at the forefront of dealing with problems of advanced societies. Things like, people being desperate, things like, all these youth problems, things like the aging. Like, what do you do when like a huge percentage of your society is elderly? It's something the West is facing more slowly, but in Japan, they've been selling more adult diapers than they've been selling baby diapers since like 2010 or something like that. I forget what the exact year was. But there's more elderly people than babies. I'm
speaking out of my ass. I'm actually Googling as I ask this. But it is my understanding, like Japanese have a tremendous life span.
And that's a problem. I mean, in a sense, you know what I'm saying? Like it's good. You want to live a long, healthy life, of course, right? But like if you're an up and coming like developing country, where most of your population dies at age 60, you don't really have to worry about elder care and like elder homes and things like that. And in Japan, you get this inverse where like the birth rate's gone way down. And that's true of all advanced societies. Like, advanced societies where you have higher degrees of education and free access or easy access to like birth control, like people are going to choose to have smaller families. Like most people don't choose to have like 11, 12, 13 kids, which is great if you're a developing country and you need a young workforce. It's not so great, if you're somebody trying to like make a living in like a big city, you know what I mean? On a salary that's not like Elon Musk's salary.
Right.
It's probably you only want one or two kids, or even if you do want more kids, you hold yourself back from doing that because you don't think you could afford it.
Right.
So Japan's been struggling with that for a long time too. So it's that's another way in which they got to the future a little bit ahead of the rest of us.
Yeah, I remember there's talking about them getting to the future. Now I'm moving more towards something technological, but I remember when I was in school, there was like I want to say it was a weekly reader. I don't know if you had those when you were in school.
Yeah. God, I haven't heard that word in a long time.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I don't even know if that still exists. But there was a video phone. This was like early 2000s. But Japan, when did you move to Japan?
I first started coming and visiting in the 90s, but I moved here in 2003.
I remember.
So I've been here for
Yeah, so you've been there a while. So you might have seen this. Like it was a video phone. It was like early days of cell phones. I want to say like pre 2010. It's like
sure.
Yeah. Because I think I saw this in like middle school. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing the video phone, and it was well before the iPhone. I'm like, oh my fucking God, we're going to have a world with this. And I mean, what did it take us? Like, it took us, I want to say maybe 2013, 14 when FaceTime really became a thing. Something like that. And
then we realized we hated it.
No one uses it. Yes.
I try to fucking avoid being on the video phone now. It's like, back when you're watching the Jetsons as a kid, you're like, why don't we have this yet? Now you realize, like, I don't want to put on pants, to like talk to somebody. I don't want to comb my hair,
It's yeah, no, you see the FaceTime thing pop up and you're like, fuck, man, I would have answered your phone call if that wasn't FaceTime.
Yeah, totally. People don't even want to talk on the phone. This is the thing. So like when I'm dealing with like millennial or zillennials, a lot of them don't even want to send an email. They don't even they don't want to get in the phone. They want to just chat. And which is fine. I get it. I completely get it. I hated getting on the phone when I was younger myself. It's just, especially if it's somebody you don't really know or whatever, like this texting allows a little bit of distance. But look, just like those otaku were distancing themselves by using this like rarefied form of a dress, now we're all distancing from each other in all sorts of ways. Like we're all stuck in these little bubbles of our own creation.
And yet
partially,
and it's like we're trapped. We're trying to distance ourselves, but there's still an invisible wall, and that's like social media. Like, because we're still engaged. We're still on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. And then, but we're like, we still want some space from each other.
Yeah. Well, no, the problem is that we're social animals, but now we interact in ways that we're just not designed for. Humans weren't designed to interact over screens. We weren't designed to interact over texts or using emoji. Which isn't to say these things are bad. I mean, they're not going away. We better get used to them. But if you look at like kind of human evolution of like hundreds of thousands of years, like these technologies emerged like a sneeze ago. Like it's not even. It's like an eye blink ago, and but they've so fundamentally transformed our lives. This is why we have so many issues in society today, like with disinformation or like isolation or weird cyber religions causing people to siege seats of democracy, cosplaying is all sorts of crazy ways. That's why we are where we are. But, it's where all we can do is soldier through it, because the internet's not going to get turned off anytime soon.
No. If I were to go into a restaurant in Japan, just a regular casual restaurant, would I see, and I see a family of 4 sitting there, would I see the family down on their phones like I do in America?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been to a restaurant like a year and a half. I haven't been to a restaurant in quite some time. But my impression is that you don't see young people certainly, like if I go to like a cafe or something and it's the afternoon, I'm always like kind of shocked to see couples who are obviously like young people on dates order, and they're just like kind of staring at their phones the entire time. I was like, well, if I was on a date, I would probably want to be talking. But so that definitely is a trend here too. But like Japanese like eateries and drinkeries, do these words they kind of function in a different way here? Like izakaya, for instance, which are kind of seen as this sort of high-end, restaurant in the States, are basically like where you go with your coworkers to blow off steam after work, and the whole point is that you're talking to each other. And like interacting and like ordering small plates of food and stuff. And in situations like that, I don't think you see people glued to their phones as much. But if you sit like at lunch times and things like that, where like interaction is not like kind of the point of it, yeah, you definitely see that. I don't know. That's the biggest shift, I think, in human culture since I moved to Japan in general. I remember the first time I saw somebody with an iPhone here, and like you just like every time the conversation flagged for like a second, they'd be down on the phone. Like it was like this person was a little obsessive, I think, but it was like a fast forward on life for them, And again, this is something Japan invented. Like the Walkman basically was that before the iPhone existed. Like, oh, I'm bored, I'm going to listen to, Cyndi Lauper, like whatever was hot when the Walkman first came out in 1980. Now there's a billion things you can do on your cell phone. So it's like a dopamine delivery device,
I've never thought about the fast forward. I really like that though, because it is. And I would carry that over to, like, I have found myself for the last, I want to say 3 years, definitely. If I'm going to the grocery store, I have headphones in and I am listening to a podcast. I'm listening to an audiobook. I am listening to music. And it's like, I never want there to be, if I get in the shower in the morning, I'm listening to music. If I'm walking to my car, I'm listening to music. There's always something playing in my ear.
Yeah.
It feels like it's just
never downtime.
Exactly. And like, even though it's something maybe educational, maybe stimulating, maybe just mildly calm, I'm still not allowing myself to be alone with my thoughts. And I kind of tried to take myself away from that because I can't imagine that's healthy.
We're jacked all the time. We're like jacked in, we're jacked out. There's a lot of things we're jacking, it's just, we're like constantly we're constantly stimulated, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And I think the power of boredom is completely underrated. You know, back when you were a kid, you know, you're like, oh man, I was so imaginative back then. And you were bored as shit back then. And that's why you dreamed up all of this great stuff, because boredom is like, that's like you said, like you're alone with your thoughts. And I wonder partially if there's a sort of infantilization of adulthood going on right now,
Yes.
where like we're just totally embracing these childhood pleasures and like wallowing in nostalgia. And like companies are actually targeting grown-ups with like products that you would never imagine being aimed at adults. Like Play-Doh came out with a weird set of like stuff for adults. There's coloring books for adults. There's like weighted security blankets for adults, and it's great if that, you know, if that helps you make it through the day, like more power to you. I don't care if you're sculpting Play-Doh in your spare time or whatever, but it's interesting. It's interesting because we're redefining adulthood in this constantly stimulated world that our basically our ancestors have can give us no advice on how to navigate
No,
at
you're
all.
you're absolutely right. Like the coloring books, I've heard of studies where like that's been shown to reduce stress, and I'm like, that's
Sure,
cool. The
sure,
Play-Doh, like for it's shown that like if you have something to do with your hands, like
sure,
Play-Doh in a
sure, sure.
meeting, like you can
Like a
pay more
fidget
attention.
spinner.
Exactly. I'm cool with that. But like you brought up a good point where you say the infantilization of adulthood, and it's something that's been like a bothersome idea when everyone makes that joke about I'm not ready to adult
I'm
today.
adulting. I'm not
Yeah.
adulting.
And
Yes.
it's like on one hand, haha, okay, that was funny like the third time and that's it. But on the other hand, it's like, no, that's actually a pervasive mentality that a lot
It
of
is.
people have adopted. And I think it shows in how people handle their emotional situations,
Sure.
their interpersonal situations.
I mean, it's you can even look in a very broad sense at things like the spread of conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories, to me, are a very optimistic view of the world because they presuppose that there is some kind of, you know, genius behind the scenes pulling all the strings. They're basically looking for a parental figure. You know, there's somebody out there who has all the answers. I just haven't found them yet, but they're definitely out there and they have a plan. You know, it's looking for mommy, it's looking for daddy, even though it's not couched in those terms. And you know, on a less corrosive level, you know, things like I'm adulting, well, it's tough to blame people when, you know, you're saddled with debt, you can't move out of your parents' house, you're 25 years old, you're looking at movies where people are like driving around cars and dating and like, oh, putting a down payment on a house and like all of these things that you're supposed to do as an adult that you're either unable to do or you're just, or you don't have an interest in doing, like the kind of the milestones of adulthood, like what was considered grown-up behavior and what was considered like a grown-up achievement, you know, have been replaced by new achievements,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes digital virtual achievements and trophies and things like that, you know. You know, we don't have as much interest in like owning, you know, cars and property as previous generations. Like we don't have as much interest in getting smashed like Mad Men style in the office with the boys, you know what I mean? And that's probably a good thing, you know.
Yeah.
So there's definitely good stuff to be taken out of this if you can recontextualize it, you know, and not get sucked
Right.
into it.
Right. Something I do to torture myself is I think about like, I'll think about like a hero of mine or something, and like what they were experiencing or how many decades they
Sure.
have gone through. And like, if I just think about my mom, I'm like, fuck, man, I was 12 when my mom
Yeah.
was this age.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like that's a lot of life to live through. Like I was listening to the Elton John thing over the summer. I was listening to the Elton John
Yeah.
biography,
Yeah.
and it was like he was just talking about things that like the 60s or 70s, and I'm like, that motherfucker was like my age after experiencing the 50s, 60s,
Yeah.
70s.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Fuck.
You know, I remember I sat down a couple of years ago to interview a pilot, like a World War II Zero fighter pilot who was pushing 100, and he was like he was like basically my age flying over Pearl Harbor, and then like experienced like everything after that, and I was like, wow, God, like that's to see that amount of change in human society and in life is just, you know, it's shocking, and now it's going even faster. Like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's really fashionable to say like, okay, boomer now, like, you know, to like old people, and which is, yeah, it's funny, I get it, but it's like I actually think that like millennials and stuff now are going to get passed way faster by the up and coming generations than the boomers did by the Gen Xers. Gen Xers and boomers actually, like, we listen to pretty much the same music.
Mm-hmm.
It's the greatest generation, World War II people, and the boomers who had the biggest schism, where mom and dad are listening to classical music and like, what's this crazy Beatles rock and roll? Like I grew up like literally listening to like rock and going to like, R-rated movies with my parents and stuff like that. There wasn't much to rebel against because we were basically all in the same kind of pop culture together.
Right.
And now it's I think it's I'm finally actually now encountering like TikTok. Like, what is this? I'm finally like encountering YouTubers. Like, what is it? Twitch streamers? Oh my God, it's like this new forms of culture that I don't quite get. And that's good, and it's funny, and I think it's just only going to start happening faster. I can't wait for 20 years. Okay, millennial, like 20 years from now, when like young kids are saying that.
So, I mean, sometimes I watch a movie or a TV show, and you see the person just sitting there, and it's like some scene from the 70s or whatever, right? Like, what did fucking people do when all they had was TV, or what did they do when they didn't have TV?
Sex.
Fuck. Yes.
Sex.
That's how they had 5 kids.
Exactly. No, it's true though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the human. You had to go out and interact with people. Otherwise, you were literally stuck in your house doing nothing.
Yes.
I mean, it's so amazing. Like, I think honestly, if you can have people like, oh man, I wish you could time trip back to the 60s and go to Woodstock, or something like that. It's like, I don't think we'd be able to, like, I don't know what I would do without the cell phone and like access to be like, oh, can I Shazam this song? Holding it up or like whatever. Like, we're cyborgs at this stage. We're basically like these weird android creatures now, who are like barely equipped to function in a world without electronic assistance. And that's the biggest, I think, shift in. It's much more than kind of human culture. It's just kind of techno culture that has transformed us so much. And a lot of that came from Japan, and it's just a fact. A lot of it came from Japan.
It has, and some of the greatest shit has come from Japan. I was a victim of Japan back in 2000 when.
Victim of Japan. I know what you mean.
Yep. Pokemon. That was my first one, and then Digimon. I mean, technically, Tamagotchi hit me before Pokemon.
Oh yes. Oh wait.
Oh, I had that same fucking color.
This is the first one. Yeah, this is the first one.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Holy fuck.
I actually raised a Tamagotchi for the first time in like 25 years when I was writing the book, because virtual pets kind of come in there. But look, you're still raising a real life flesh and blood pet and fur, so it's Tamagotchi didn't like, infect you that much.
No, it's but I remember the craze though. I remember the obsession, and it's like, so that kind of obsession, it doesn't come around a lot. We had the Tamagotchis, we had the Pokemon cards, we had Tickle Me Elmo, Furby, thank you, a roommate. We had Furbies. Furby. Like there are these big, what was that, Hatchimals within the last, like, was that 6 years ago or something like that?
Yeah. There's but it's funny, like what have we had? Do we have global crazes anymore? We have memes now.
And it's so fast. It's done.
Yes.
Like,
it's, well, I tweeted, I have Twitter, Matt_alt. I tweeted a couple of days ago because it was the 20th anniversary of All Your Base or Belong to Us.
Holy shit.
Which is like the first really wildly popular meme ever. And like, it got thousands of like people like had been touched by this meme in a way that like you would expect people to be reacting to like the first time they heard, the Rolling Stones, or like, the first time they heard Nirvana or like whatever. Mm-hmm. It was crazy. And like, I love All Your Base Belong to Us too. I mean, it's like, especially as somebody who's in Japanese localization, that's like the holy grail, or the kind of like driving force behind all of our work. I mean, it's so beautifully fractured, that phrase. We can get into that later. But the point of this being that, memes are culture now. They are our pop culture. And like, try explaining that to your great grandma. I was on the computer and somebody made this like anime drawing and like everybody on the planet saw it, like, what's a computer? What's anime?
Something that bothers me though, and this kind of goes back to just our overstimulation, is how fast we metabolize these things. Because like, All Your Base Belong to Us, that was funny that's always funny to us, but like, that was still I didn't hear about it until 2006, right? So it was still years after, and I still found it fucking hilarious, right?
Yes.
But now everything gets so processed, everyone gets exposed to every meme, and I want to say, like, this is all subjective on my part, but I want to say that like from 2014 memes to 2021 memes, like the rate at which even then, you know, we had months of like what Insanity Wolf and all those other fucking Reddit memes, the
Oh yeah,
advice
God.
animals, but
Yes.
those advice animals lasted for a long time. The you used to call me on your cell phone meme where with what's his name, Drake. Thank you.
Well, yeah,
Oh,
I mean, there's a few that do stick around, but like they're
mm-hmm,
by nature designed to be ephemeral.
mm-hmm.
I guarantee you, like 50 years, 100 years from now, there's going to be like a Smithsonian of memes. Like it's as much of pop culture as like, you know, or to say it's pop culture actually kind of minimizes it. They're culture. We spend all of our times online. We spend all of our time online right now. So it's like those things take on an outsized importance. But you know, you use the word metabolize, and I think, you know, when I was growing up, there was all of this talk about like the information superhighway, and we're living in an information society. And it's true, but I don't think anybody really realized what that meant to
Mm-hmm.
actually live in that. And we are consuming it and we are digesting it or trying to. And, you know, it's like all candy, no fiber right now. You know what I mean? It's all just like stuff that just, you know,
Yes, yes.
it gives you like a rapid like high, and then you want the next high, and it's like there's I think that one of the things we're missing, and not because anybody's wrong or bad, but just because, like I said, we're still struggling with this, is like a educating particularly young people about how to be more educated consumers in a hyper media society, which is where if we were in an information society in the 90s, we're in some kind of like through the 2001 space monolith, you know, warp zone 8.4 of Super Mario Brothers level, like crazy, you know, turn on the hyperdrive level information society now. And nobody knows how to navigate it, which is why you get so many lost people clinging on to insane beliefs, you know, that they make by randomly searching websites and like kind of putting together bits of information they find on Facebook or on YouTube.
I like
So
the candy analogy because
yeah,
we are just, and a lot of it's entertaining, and I think through the lens of that candy, like comes in flavors of very serious thought. Like you'll see memes that are like flash in the pan, this image is going to last a week,
yeah,
but it metabolizes some very serious thoughts and ideas about adult existentialism,
yes,
emotions, you know,
yeah,
interpersonal
yeah. I mean,
relationships.
they're
But
real. Their memes are real. Like they're connecting into some kind of feeling you have.
yep,
You know, that's why they resonate. So you weren't kidding about the cat in your
yeah,
shoulder.
yeah.
So this is a meme right here. This is like
I,
a furry living meme.
I mean, I've been like through the last 15 minutes or so having my hand just like this, like stop, don't. And he just like this time
Stop the insanity.
he backed up and
I
he's
know.
like, "You're not going to stop me." And so I lifted my cord and just admitted
Yeah, you just
defeat.
get under the cord. Get up here. Get up
But
here.
I think that it's going to be good when we finally realize that our bodies are overstimulated with the bad stuff, that we need to, if we're going to consume information quickly. There's a thing called, it's a book app. I can't remember what it's called, but it's Blips or some shit like that. But it's basically, here's a book summarized in 15 minutes. Like obviously you're not
Right,
going to
right. The
get
Cliff's
huge.
Notes. Remember the Cliff's Notes?
Yes, yes, just like that. And it's like
Yes,
here's the premise of chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3.
yes,
And I think it's really interesting because it gives you somewhat of exposure to some new ideas. It might spark interest in actually sitting down with the book in the
yes.
long term. But I think that type of informational positive, not as easy to consume media is going to be like the counterbalance to that.
Yeah, it could be like executive summaries, I think is what those
Yes.
used to be called back in the day. But yeah, I mean, we're desperate for some kind of control, you know, because we feel like we're out of control. You turn on the internet and like, you know, you wake up in the morning, or maybe it's like, and you're probably literally picking up your iPad, your iPhone next to your bed and plugging into it. And like, you're like, you want control. That's what we all want. And I don't mean control in some kind of weird control freak way. You want to
Mm-hmm.
be in control of your life and your destiny. And especially now in the middle of this fatal pandemic gripping the entire fucking planet, it's even more difficult than usual to, you know, feel like you have control over your life. And that's natural. That's actually, it would be weird if you felt better now. You know what I mean? I can't leave my house and like everybody's dying. Great. Like that would be completely absurd and weird. So like, you know, the fact that we kind of feel like shit right now, but nobody, like, we're not used to feeling like shit. It's not like your great grandparents who were like, trying to make it through the Great Depression on like a farm that had turned into a dust bowl in, the Great Plains or something like that. We're used to not feeling bad, so when we do, it's like hyper amplified. It's like, it's almost like a little kid having a temper tantrum or something like that. We don't know how to control these emotions. We don't know how to kind of take control of our lives. And, I do think we will make it through this somehow, but it's a tough period. And we're going to look back on this as a tough period.
It is. And, I think that kind of is a good way to explain how some people, for the right reasons, miss back in the day, right?
Yeah.
Like people, I don't know, do you watch South Park?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have. I don't watch it regularly, but yeah.
Do you remember the member berries?
No, tell me about this.
Okay, so the member berries were these little grapes, and that they would always say, it started off innocent, where it's like, do you remember Star Wars? Like, because people were complaining about the new Star Wars, so it's like,
right.
Do you remember the old one? They're like, yeah, I remember, and then it slowly became like, do you remember the 80s? Oh yeah, and Ronald Reagan? Oh yeah, but then they became like Nazis and like shit like that. But that was the illusion, is that like people say, I wish it was like the good old days, but then you think about like the good old days had bad shit. Yeah. But I can actually understand with that lack of control feeling, the feeling that like with the way media flies by you and you see all this crazy stuff happening in the world, it's understandable that people think, fuck, man, I remember when we didn't worry about cancel culture. We didn't worry about all this other stuff.
When social change happens fast, it's a combination of things. When social change happens fast, it's disconcerting. But also in America, there's a huge discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots. So when like you are somebody who doesn't have a lot of money, but all you do is watch shows like Keeping Up with the Kardashians or like, whatever, it's really, you can start to really feel like you have fucked up in your life when you haven't. You know what I mean? It's or that everybody is going to get to that level if they work hard enough, or that, you've somehow been cheated. And it's that kind of huge difference in like income disparity and stuff like that I think in combination with everything else that really drives stuff in America. There's a famous like comment, I forget who made it, that like all Americans think they're just kind of temporarily disadvantaged multimillionaires, like, which is why you have so many people who probably should be organizing for like unions and like, to kind of put brakes on what corporations are doing, actually advocating against their best interest because they think they're going to get rich someday and they don't want to have to pay taxes, that kind of thing. So you get this, America is a little bit schizophrenic about that right now. And that's something you actually don't see very much of in Japanese society. There isn't as much of a visible discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots. There's amazing infrastructure here. Like whether you're rich or poor, you can get in a bullet train and get to a major city within like an hour or two, and you have nationalized healthcare. If you get sick, you're not going to go bankrupt. It's when I go to the doctor, I pay like 15 or 20 bucks here. It's amazing. I don't even know what I would do if I went back to the States and got sick. I could be ruined by it. That's crazy. Like, and after living here for like 15 or 20 years, I'm like, this is not some communist like attempt to take our rights away from us. It's great. I'm happy to pay taxes for this.
No, and I mean it's something that we don't have to like bankrupt. We don't have to, tax millionaires half or more of their money to get that. It's in many ways it's a matter of being against the policy because people have that view of it, that it is some socialist takeover of our healthcare system, or people don't. There's also there's a tough love phenomena in America where people and it's like
bootstrapping.
Exactly. And it's like, no, as a sign of our country's wealth and success and power, we can take care of our people. No person has to worry about whether or not they should call the doctor.
One thing I wanted to, because we have to wrap this up, is I don't want to make it seem like Japan is some kind of utopia in this sense. Japan has, as a society, has huge problems, particularly dealing with women. Like women just do not have equal say in corporate culture, or like I don't know if you saw the scandal where the chairman of the Olympic Committee here is like, women talk too much.
I didn't.
That's why I don't have. That's why I don't have more women. Well, and he got fired for that, and which is good. That's a change. Back in time, he probably wouldn't have been.
Yeah.
So Japan is absolutely, and there's all sorts of problems with like weird religions and cult groups, and like, like you were talking about the suicide rate, loneliness. They just named a minister of loneliness, like a government level minister of loneliness, to deal with that problem in Japanese society. And also, if Japan is such a beautiful place, why is it producing all of these self-help books that we love so much, whether it's Marie Kondo or forest bathing or the courage to be disliked or all of these other things. So it's a nation with huge problems, but it's also, there's things we can learn from it, which is exactly why, I wrote my book. And I hope that people who listen to this will pick it up.
Well, I know I'm going to. So Pure Invention. What's that say? I can't read it.
Pure Invention, How Japan's Pop Culture, it just disappeared. How Japan's Pop Culture Conquered the World. So this is this backwards on your screen? It's backwards on my screen.
No, it's good on my screen.
Yeah, but it's this came out last year. It's available everywhere books are sold, and it tells kind of this story of how Japan created modern times through the lens of all of these products that we love: the Walkman, Hello Kitty, the Famicom / Nintendo Entertainment System, or the Game Boy. Anonymous image boards, 2channel to 4chan, and 8kun, and all the rest of that wildness. So if you enjoyed this conversation, I hope people will pick the book up.
Absolutely. I know I will be. Where can they find you on Twitter?
Twitter, Matt_alt. I'm on Instagram, @MattAlt. I'm on Facebook. I'm everywhere except TikTok. I'm not on TikTok. So sorry about that.
Awesome.
That's for young people. Not for
it's
me.
Addictive. It is. We talk about that another time, but it's like the algorithm is amazing. They know how to get you.
You should walk me through it sometime. We can make that another visit.
Absolutely. Well, hey man, it was great having you, folks.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Sorry I have to run.
No, it's all good. You all have a great night, and check out Matt's book, and we'll talk to you soon.
Catch you later.